Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have already had one day of intellectual feasting, full of interesting and often exciting discussions. And with our appetites now well whetted, we look forward to once again being intellectually stimulated and given an altogether scintillating and thought-provoking experience. I'm thrilled to see quite so many of you joining us this morning. For those of you who are enriching us for the first time in this edition, please allow me to introduce myself again. My name is Priyasha Dixit. I am a research associate at the National Maritime Foundation, and I'm pleased to be your host for this seminal event. Forgive me for pointing this out quite so frequently, but please, please, please keep your mobile phones muted at all times. Please do not seek to interrupt any speaker while he or she is giving his or her presentation. On the other hand, you are welcome to pose questions during the time reserved for audience interaction at the end of each session. As I have been saying repeatedly since yesterday, ask hard questions and expect robust responses. Once more, kindly be advised that since the biodatas of all speakers and moderators are included in your conference booklets, in the interest of time, we will not be reading them out. I thank you in advance for your cooperation and understanding. And now, let me hand over the proceedings to the audiovisual team, who will be very happy if you would allow yourselves to sit back and enjoy a visual depiction of what the forthcoming professional session has in store for all of us.
The global geo-economic pendulum has returned to its historical point of rest in the maritime expanse of the Indo-Pacific. This region is now at the heart of a growing struggle to maintain and sustain a consensually determined, rules-based order that ensures the equitable sharing of marine resources. On one side are those who recognize the importance of resource-driven maritime supply chains, which must remain immune to weaponization and economic coercion. On the other side are those who seek to assert newfound power, creating a selectively dictated order that champions exceptionalism and treats the concept of a multipolar geopolitical balance with disdain. At stake are crucial marine resources, nutritional resources like krill and fish, trade resources through shipping lanes, and mineral riches found deep in the seabed. With bilateral efforts strengthened by the Quad and India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, Japan's security concerns are inextricably linked to maintaining open sea lanes and securing access to crucial resources in contested waters. This reliance on maritime routes has deepened India and Japan's relations to ensure energy security, particularly in the South China Sea. But this is not a battle fought by Japan and India alone. Multilateral cooperation is the only approach to securing mutual growth and access to resources in the Indo-Pacific. As we will hear from the United States, maintaining a rules-based order in these waters is not just a regional imperative, but a global one. Europe, too, is grappling with China's rising influence. The European Union sees China as a partner, competitor, and systemic rival all at once. Yet recent developments have tilted this balance, revealing systemic distortions in China's economic model that have negative repercussions for its global trading partners. In response, Germany's vision of strategic autonomy seeks to diversify its sources of raw materials, while France, possessing one of the world's largest maritime domains, plays an ever-crucial role in safeguarding Indo-Pacific marine resources. In the face of China's growing influence, nations like the United Kingdom and India have come together in joint efforts to curb illegal fishing, protect undersea infrastructure, and bolster maritime security. These partnerships are a strategic response to the shifting power dynamics in the region. So, how are we to navigate the tug-of-war between these competing visions for the Indo-Pacific? Will there emerge a companionship of the just, or merely a coalition of the willing? Could there be other possibilities we're missing simply because we are too immersed in the problem? In this second professional session, we will hear from the UK, Japan, the US, France, and Germany, voices that are perhaps far enough removed to help us see the woods, not just the trees.
Ladies and gentlemen, to begin today's proceedings, I'm privileged to invite on stage Professor of International Relations from the Department of Political Science at the University of Copenhagen, Denmark, Dr. Christian Bueger, on stage to deliver his special address. Dr. Bueger is being escorted on stage by Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, DG NMF, and Admiral Karambir Singh, Chairman NMF. So you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Excellencies, officers, colleagues, friends. Since we have started to talk about the Indo-Pacific in the 2010s, we actually have come quite a long way. And in many ways, the debate on the Indo-Pacific has become one of the engine rooms to think through what maritime security means today and what the priorities actually are that we should be setting, not only for the Indo-Pacific, but for global maritime security much more broadly. It's my immense pleasure to give the first address today on the second day of this very important forum. And let me thank you, the organizers, not only for inviting me here today, but for putting together this very, very important strategic forum. Dialogues such as this one are absolutely vital, not only for establishing where we are, what our challenges are, but also for figuring out what our priorities for the future should be. In this sense, what I would like to do in this address here this morning is to talk a little bit about the future of maritime security. Where are we heading towards? What should we be paying attention to in terms of developing our strategic thoughts? And I like to draw on our recent book, the book Understanding Maritime Security, written together with my colleague Tim Edmonds from the University of Bristol, was just published with Oxford University Press this May. And what the book is trying to do is it wants to develop a go-to resource, a comprehensive place to learn about maritime security. It looks into the history and evolution of maritime security from the 1990s onwards. It looks at terrorism, piracy, interstate disputes, and so on. But also tries to understand what are the solutions to maritime security problems and how will these solutions look like in the future. I also would like to introduce you to some of the ideas that we are currently developing in Copenhagen as part of our ocean infrastructure research group. And this is very much work that is about developing a new vision of global ocean politics. Let's not forget that many of the ideas that we often rely on, such as freedom of navigations, are century-old. And the question is, do these ones still apply? So what I would like to do here this morning is, first of all, I like to identify 3 strategic mega trends. And trying to be a good German, I am not only bringing you 3 trends, but also 3 responses to these trends. So it is basically 3 and 3 that the following thoughts are being structured. Let me start with the first mega trends that we all should be paying attention to. Trend number 1 can be called the blue acceleration and the age of infrastructures. What does it mean? Never before in human history have we been using the oceans as intensively as we're doing right now, and never before in human history have we been as dependent on the sea as we are right now. And that is a trend that will continue. To give you just some examples, global shipping has widely expanded. Ships have become bigger and bigger. A third of global energy comes from the sea. And this number is continuously on the rise because of our green energy futures are basically dependent on offshore energy resources, offshore wind, offshore solar farms, but also tidal energies. And all of this comes along with an expanding global underwater electricity grid. Global communication is also fully dependent on the sea, with the thousands of kilometers connecting our globe and providing the backbone of the global internet. The expansion of these kind of infrastructures mean that the sea is in many ways no longer this pristine nature that we used to think about it, but it is now an industrialized space that is full of infrastructure. And this expansion of our use of the sea is going to continue. Many of our future resources are out at sea: wind, tidal energy, but also green hydrogen, the pipeline network that we will need for green hydrogen, carbon capture technology. All of that means we will need to use the oceans more extensively. The same goes for digital communications. If we want to expand the use of artificial intelligence, this means we need to have access to supercomputing facilities. How are we going to get this access? It is through subsea data cables. So also this network will be massively expanding. All of this basically means that in the age of infrastructures, maritime security, maritime space is becoming congested. We are running out of space, literally, at sea. And the oceans are becoming much more industrialized. They're more human rather than a space of nature. So this is megatrend number one. Megatrend number two, the ocean are in a polycrisis. Now, this is not something new. This has been observed across the board, across global ocean politics, that there are multiple crises out at sea. Partially, these crises are the outcome of the first trend, of the blue acceleration. Overusing the sea has led to overfishing, it has led to pollution, chemical pollution, pharmaceutical pollution, oil pollution, and so on. It also has led to new vulnerabilities. Local accidents today can have global repercussions, and both the Evergreen incident in the Suez Canal, but also the damage, the accident with the Baltimore Bridge more recently, show the scale of how a small local accident can have global repercussions. And the Evergreen accident rightfully has been called a global loss event because it cost billions and billions of dollars. On top of that, we are also looking at the more existential crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. And here, quite obviously, we are looking into sea level rise, more extreme weather events, the loss of food resources, and if we're looking into the future, perhaps most dramatically, the substantial loss of genetic resources. The pressures caused by these polycrises at sea is on the rise, and solutions are not really in sight. So this is the time for pessimism. That was trend number two, the polycrisis. Let me come to trend number three, which is the decline of traditional multilateralism. There is less and less appetite for global and comprehensive solutions if it comes to the sea, solutions that are agreed in international organizations and the UN system. Multilateralism is not completely gone. Let's remind ourselves the BBNJ, the new High Seas Treaty, was just recently concluded. A plastic treaty is on the way. However, many states today have a preference not for developing new global rules, but for working in informal, pragmatic, smaller, minilateral setups. And AUKUS and the Quad are a perfect example for this in the Indo-Pacific region. In the Western Indian Ocean, a good example would be the combined maritime forces. So this basically means that it becomes more and more difficult to find global solutions, to develop the rules-based order, not only to defend it, but develop new rules that we need for the future. And this is becoming much more difficult. That's trend number 3. So what does all of this mean for maritime security? What do these 3 mega trends of global ocean politics imply for maritime security? Let me focus on 3 of the major consequences. There are many, many more, but let me emphasize 3. The first one we have already referred to, and that is the need to look beyond surface. Maritime security today happens up there in the sky, in the space, and it happens down there under the sea, where the majority of important infrastructures are laid. So that means maritime security strategy today needs to look up, it needs to look down, and it needs to go beyond the focus on the surface and ships. So we need to look at maritime security much more comprehensively in that sense. It also means that we need to start to get better to actually see the entanglement between maritime security, the cybersecurity agenda, but also the space security agenda. Let's not forget that navigation today is dependent on satellites. Maritime domain awareness is increasingly becoming dependent on satellites. And that basically means that space security and maritime security are closely interwoven today. The second consequence is directly related to the age of infrastructure. Infrastructures are becoming so vital, so fundamental for the running of the global economy and for tackling the climate and biodiversity crisis, that we need to reorient our security thinking towards the protection of infrastructures. Enhancing resilience in regional infrastructure systems, but also ensuring that least developed and small island states have access to infrastructure are in many ways the new global common security agenda. And a key objective of contemporary maritime security has to be to protect these common infrastructures. So that basically means that instead of thinking about the oceans as a common heritage of mankind, we should start thinking about it as a common infrastructure of mankind that needs to be protected and cared for, which is a fundamental new objective for maritime security. Let me gradually come to the end and the third strategic consequence. We need to bring back better balance to maritime security governance. Now, we have recently completed the work on a new report, which will come out with the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research in November. And this report does a global assessment of all the governance mechanisms for maritime security. The conclusion from that report is there is way too much emphasis on regional and informal maritime security solution, which is the outcome of the decline of traditional multilateralism. Now you might think regionalism, informality, pragmatic solution, that's a good thing, and that's in principle right. However, if we're only working with informal and pragmatic configurations, it implies a lack of accountability. It becomes more difficult to hold states and other actors accountable. And we do not have a global fora where we could clarify what the law of the sea means, or where we could develop new rules. Right? There's no global fora where we could discuss what is gray zone, what is unlawful, and so on. We have the UN Security Council. Yes, we have the IMO. We have a lot of partial fora, but we do not have this one global fora on a global level. A United Nations steering mechanism for maritime security is missing. And that basically means that we need to recalibrate the governance of maritime security to have a better and more optimal mix between the formal and the informal, and between the regional and the global. Above all, I think what we need to return to is the extremely useful proposal that His Excellency the Prime Minister Modi made at the UN Security Council in 2021. And the Prime Minister proposed to develop a dedicated UN maritime security body. And this is, I think, the direction we should walk towards. And this is also one of the recommendations that you will find in the UNIDIR report that you can read in November. Let me conclude here. When we are discussing the ocean and maritime security, we have to take into account that our relationship to the oceans is radically changing. Expansion of oceanic activity, age of infrastructures. The oceans look radically different today than they have looked like 10, 15 years ago. And that means maritime security thinking has to go beyond surface. We need to pay attention to infrastructure protection as a core new objective for maritime security. And we need to start recalibrate maritime security governance, paying in particular attention to the UN level. I hope this provides some interesting food for thought for today, for tomorrow, and after. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in continuation of the book release effected yesterday, I have the privilege to now present to this audience a second NMF publication that once again reflects the scholarship of the NMF. This one entitled India's Blue Economy Transition, and to request Dr. Bueger to do us the honor of releasing it. This book has been edited and compiled by a trio of NMF scholars comprising Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Dr. Chimi Yudun, Research Fellow, and Dr. Gulshan Sharma, Junior Research Fellow. The publication analyzes the transformational shift in India's mental map of the Indo-Pacific maritime landscape as the country transitions from a brown to a blue economy, as a function of the urgent need to address climate change and preserve maritime resources. Dr. Bueger, may I request you to kindly do the honors. Thank you, sir. May I now request Admiral Karambir Singh, Chairman NMF, to present a small token of our gratitude to Dr. Bueger And in the same breath, may I request everyone to please come ahead of the tables for a group photograph immediately after the ceremony. Thank you, sir. May I request the dignitaries on stage to resume their seats in the audience? Thank you, sir. I would now request the moderator and speakers of Professional Session 2 to join us on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an exceptional lineup of 5 speakers for this session. Ms. Marianne Perondoise, who will be joining us online, Professor Alessio Patalano, Mr. Jeffery Payne, Dr. Gudrun Walker, and Mr. Hideshi Tokuchi. To moderate this session, we are honored to have Admiral Sunil Lanba, AVSM, VSM, former Chairman, Chiefs of Staff Committee, former Chief of the Naval Staff, and former Chairman of the NMF. Sir, I hand over the proceedings to you.
Admiral Karambir Singh, flag officers, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. Yesterday, when we had a session on resources, we looked at Southeast Asia. In this session, we are going further east and having a look also from our west. At the moment, West Asia or Middle East is in turmoil. You have the conflict in Gaza. Now it has been expanded to Lebanon. Just the other day, there was a ballistic missile strike on Israel by Iran. And now there are talks going on as what is going to be the counter by Israel on Iran. And yesterday, President Biden has made a statement of looking at whether Israel will carry out strike on the petrochemical infrastructure in Iran. Already the crude oil prices have spiked by 5% over the last 3 days, and crude oil, Brent light crude oil, is trading at $75 a barrel. Let's assume that there is a strike on the petroleum infrastructure in Iran by Israel. That will put the petrochemical infrastructure and market in turmoil. In case it leads to a counter-strike by Iran on Israel again, what is going to be the next step Israel is going to take, whether she's going to strike the nuclear infrastructure in Iran? What is the effect of the proxies, especially the Houthis, which are going to do in the Red Sea and the state of Bab al-Mandab? How is shipping going to get affected in the Red Sea? What actions will be needed to be taken by multilateral forces to keep this vital sea lanes open? So there are a lot of uncertainties. So in this session, we are going to have a look at security of energy on a Japanese perspective and what India and Japan can do together. And then we will move west and look at resource geopolitics from a European perspective and what is the state of play by Dr. Pines on the American side. So I had 10 minutes. Very rarely do moderators get 10 minutes to make an opening statement. I was wondering what to say. I'm not going to second guess what they're going to say. And I thought, let me give you an Indian example. We are all here sitting in Northwest India. And when you look at the petrochemicals infrastructure in Northwest India, we have 3 refineries in Northwest India. The largest one being in Panipat, one in Bathinda, one in Mathura, and there is one which is due to be commissioned and come line in January in Barmer. When you look at this map, it is showing you the pipeline infrastructure. The refineries in Mathura, Panipat, and Bathinda are supported by pipelines running from the Gulf of Kutch. Basically, Panipat is from Salala Mathura pipeline, Bathinda from the Mundra Bathinda pipeline, and Mathura also from the Salala Mathura pipeline. We have the largest refinery in the world, the Reliance refinery in Jamnagar, which has a capacity of over 1.24 million barrels per day. That is 1.6% refining capacity of the world in one refinery located in the Gulf of Kutch. The Reliance refinery in Jamnagar also has the highest coefficient of energy called the Nelson's coefficient of 21.1. That means the next refinery in the world which has a lesser coefficient is almost 10 percentage points lower. The Jamnagar refinery converts, when you look at the crisis of the Russian-Ukrainian war and the ban on import by Europeans of the Russian crude oil, the Russian crude oil came to the Jamnagar refinery, got refined, and petrol and diesel was supplied from here to Europe. So basically, you're bypassing the ban. So just imagine in case there is a disruption in the maritime traffic into the Gulf of Kutch. It is through a very narrow channel at the mouth of the Gulf. You will find the whole of Northwest India crippled with lack of supply of crude oil going to the Northwest, these 3 refineries. Okay. So we will examine what is the resource geopolitics of different this thing. There are also issue of living and non-living resources. And in the opening address today in the special session, we've laid out what are the terms and conditions. So I'll stop here and over to you, Professor, for your first talk.
Well, good morning, everyone. First of all, let me thank the National Maritime Foundation for inviting me to this great conference this year as well. Thank you very much. As time is very much limited, I'd like to discuss Japan-India maritime cooperative options in terms of maritime transportation of energy. Well, first of all, energy and security. International Energy Agency defines energy security as shown here, the uninterrupted availability of energy source at an affordable price. Long-term energy supply mainly deals with timely investments, and short-term one focuses on the ability of the energy system to react promptly to sudden changes within the supply-demand balance. It is true that a stable supply of energy is critically important for the survival of any country in the world, but it is basically a matter of energy supply. Today, anything considered to be critically important may easily become a matter of security, and the definition of the term security is being diluted. If everything is defined as a matter of security like this, the term security will be a very hollow political slogan, and nothing will be a matter of priority. So we have to be very, very careful in the use of this term. However, a stable supply of energy is closely linked to national and international security. For example, countries entered into wars in order to secure energy sources, such as Imperial Japan, which entered into war with the United States in the early 1940s. For another example, countries expand their territorial claims for energy sources, such as China, which began to claim Japan's Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea in 1971. 2 years after the UN Economic Commission for Asia and the Far East, ECAFE, which is now called ESCAP, issued a report which pointed out the possibility of oil reserve in the East China Sea. If I refer to one more example, wars threaten energy supply. In response to the US support of Israel in the Fourth Arab-Israel War of 1973, Arab members of the OPEC decided to reduce oil production and declared oil embargo after against several countries, including Japan, causing the 1973 energy crisis. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is another example of dithering energy and natural resources supply. Now, Japan's energy sufficiency, self-sufficiency. Japan lacks in natural resources and energy. Its energy sufficiency was only 12.6% in 2022, even if nuclear energy is counted as a domestic resource. It is much less than that of Russia, that of US, that of China, and that of India. It is the second lowest in the OECD member states. Japan is not only scarce in natural resource and energy resources, but also an island country, and therefore securing energy is not easy. Most of coal is imported from Australia and Indonesia, and most of natural gas is imported from Australia and Malaysia. They are relatively nearby, but more than 95% of crude oil is imported from the Middle East, the South China Sea, a focal point of East Asian maritime security, and also the US-China rivalry, is very important for Japan in 2 points from the perspective of energy security. First, energy reserve. The South China Sea is estimated to have 11.2 billion barrels of oil reserve, which is 9 times as much as Japan's annual import of crude oil. The South China Sea is also estimated to have 190 trillion square feet of natural gas, which is about 45 times as much as Japan's annual import of natural gas. And second, sea lane defense. 23% of the crude oil transported through the South China Sea goes to Japan, and 57% of the natural gas transported through the South China Sea goes to Japan. Now, energy security and maritime security in Japan's national security strategy. The Japanese government renewed its national security strategy in December 2022 in response to the intensified rivalry between the United States and China. As in the previous national security strategy of 2013, it defines Japan as a maritime nation. This strategic document specifies 9 fields in which Japan will seamlessly protect its national interests by promoting cross-governmental policies. One of them is promoting maritime security and strengthening maritime law enforcement capabilities. And another important field is securing resources essential for Japan's national security, including energy and food. And it states, In cooperation with its allies, like-minded countries, and international organizations, Japan will drive forward measures to improve Japan's energy self-sufficiency ratio and build a robust energy supply system that can withstand contingencies. In order to secure a stable supply of energy, Japan must take a holistic approach, including diversification of energy suppliers. Stronger ties with like-minded countries are written here. But from the viewpoint of national security, security of transportation, particularly protection of sea lanes of communication, including enhancement of maritime law enforcement capabilities, is critically important. And more specifically, the national security strategy states, as shown here, Japan will advance multilateral maritime security cooperation by enhancing maritime surveillance to respond to threats in sea lanes, active bilateral drills, and exercises with other countries and overseas port calls. In addition, anti-piracy and intelligence gathering activities will be conducted to ensure the safety of maritime traffic. And in any of these items of measures, partnership with India is very important for Japan. Now, I'll proceed to the issues of Japan-India security cooperation. As a matter of fact, the government of Japan places high priority on the partnership with India in the entire international security cooperation. It is evident in Japan's national security strategy. The top priority is on, of course, on the United States, because the United States is the only ally of Japan. The second priority is on Australia, quasi-ally of Japan and close ally of the United States in the entire Indo-Pacific. And third priority is on India. India's priority is much higher than in the 2013 version of the national security strategy. The relationship between India and Japan has been elevated to the special strategic and global partnership. Why is India such important for Japan? It's quite obvious. According to the Defense White Paper of Japan, India is the world's largest democracy. It has achieved steady economic growth in recent years and has significant influence in the Southeast Asian region. And also, it is located in the middle of the Indian Ocean, which is of strategic and geopolitical importance. India has also increased its presence as a geopolitical player, and the international community has high expectations on the country's role in the world. This is the recognition by the Japanese government. Now, the bilateral security relationship is in rapid progress in recent years. Both countries have a formal framework of diplomatic and security partnership, namely the 2+2 ministerial meeting. In addition, the two countries concluded the agreement concerning the transfer of defense equipment and technology, agreement concerning the security measures for the protection of classified military information, both in 2015, and also acquisition and cross-servicing agreement, AXA, in 2020. So, security partnership between the two countries have such a wide variety of useful tools to drive with. Maritime security is placed on the top of defense cooperation items between the two countries in Japan's national defense strategy. Both countries have been promoting the vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific bilaterally and also through the Quad. Japan's self-defense forces, I mean the Japanese military forces, has been contributing to the promotion of the FOIP vision in the following 3 points. First, securing stable use of major sea lanes by defense cooperation and exchange activities. Second, preventing contingencies through confidence-building measures and mutual understanding. And third, contributing to peace and stability through active engagement in the region in cooperation with partner countries. With regard to the first point, the self-defense forces has been trying to enhance its cooperation and exchange with Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Pacific Island region, in which key sea lanes are located, as well as with the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and key regions for energy security. If we focus on maritime security cooperation in the bilateral, Quad, and multilateral context, the recent development is noteworthy as follows. 3 Japan-India maritime exercises since April 2023. Quad joint minesweeping exercise in June last year. Quad Malabar exercise also in August last year. Quad Chiefs of Naval Staff meeting in September last year. And International Exercise Milan, hosted by the Indian Navy in this February. Most recently, in August this year, both countries held a third session of the 2+2 ministerial meeting here in Delhi. And according to the joint statement, the 4 ministers looked forward to having dialogues in several important areas, including maritime affairs and international law. They welcomed the conduct of bilateral exercises of all the 3 services in 1 calendar year for the first time in 2023. And they also welcomed, the 4 ministers also expressed their commitment to continuing bilateral and multilateral exercises, including the Dharma Guardian, JIMEX, and Malabar. Their cooperation is not limited to dialogues, meetings, and exercises. The 2+2 joint statement states, as shown here, including the possibility of transferring unified complex radio antenna, or UNICOM, and also the joint working group on equipment and technology. The 4 ministers welcomed the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, the Japanese Navy, and also the Indian Naval Force, exploring future cooperation in the area of ship maintenance here in this country. These new developments are quite substantial. In particular, ship maintenance cooperation in India would help enhance Japan's naval operations in the Indian Ocean. Another point in recent developments is the intention of both governments to revise and update the 2008 Joint Declaration on Security Cooperation between the 2 countries in order to reflect contemporary priorities and be responsive to contemporary security challenges facing them. Although the 2 countries recognized in the 2008 Joint Declaration that India and Japan share common interest in the safety of sea lines of communication, it is this Joint Declaration is a product in the age of the global war on terrorism, and when the Japanese Maritime Defense Force unit was conducting refueling mission to support Operation Enduring Freedom's Maritime Interdiction Operation, OEF-MIO, Japan's counter-piracy mission in the Gulf of Aden had not begun yet in 2008. Elements of cooperation in this 2008 document includes cooperation between the coast guards and safety for transport, but the entire declaration should be renewed in order first to adapt to the new age of great power competition at sea, and second, incorporate IPMDA, Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness in the Quad context, and third, to pursue a holistic approach, including defense equipment technology cooperation and cyber and space cooperation. All these are important to ensure maritime transportation security in the Indo-Pacific. Now, I would like to conclude my presentation by adding a few words about the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, IPOI. It is a great initiative, a holistic approach for the security and growth of the entire Indo-Pacific region by Modi government. India's initiative should be highly appreciated, and like-minded countries, particularly all the lead countries of the 7 pillars, namely Australia, the UK, France, Indonesia, Germany, Singapore, Italy, the United States, and of course Japan, should work together more closely. All these countries are hopefully willing to cooperate with India and with each other. But first of all, India should follow up the progress of respective pillars by showing its leadership and by clarifying the overall vision and specific direction and goal of the IPOI. For the purpose of the theme of security of maritime transportation in particular, India should connect the maritime security pillar with the trade connectivity and maritime transport pillar by facilitating exchange of notes between the 2 pillars and other measures. Now, Japan needs a stable environment in the Indian Ocean region in order to secure energy resources, particularly crude oil. India needs stable environment in the Pacific because the United States, Australia, South Korea, and Japan, these countries are important trade partners for India. We need, India and Japan need to discuss division of labor furthermore. I stop here and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tokuchi, for sticking to your time. Over to you, Jeffrey.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My thanks to the Indian Navy, to the National Maritime Foundation, as always. It's great to be back. I look forward to the questions. I will try to get through the presentation as rapidly as possible and keep you all alert this Friday morning. I have to call out the good leadership of the National Maritime Foundation for giving me this topic. Given the circumstances of the past week, my job became infinitely more difficult. So I will try to navigate this. The one notation before I begin is that please understand that while I work at the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies, or what we just call NESA, Americans don't like to use a lot of words, so we always abbreviate, is attached to the U.S. government. I'm speaking here just from Jeff's point of view. So if I get it right, good on Jeff. If Jeff gets it wrong, well, that's to be expected. So I'm going to dive into kind of the U.S. perspective on the state of play when it comes to resource geopolitics in South and West Asia. So broadly, when it comes to what we could call the wider Western Indian Ocean region, we're getting into the idea of, from the U.S. mindset, rules, resources, and then the challenges that exist in the maritime domain. So what are U.S. aims and efforts? So we have a lot of maritime components and dimensions of the current conflicts. If I want to completely exit out of the conversations about what is happening currently in the Middle East, I could say it's really, really, really complicated. But to put more on it, obviously we have the conflict in Gaza that was initiated as a result of the October 7th attacks. We have the expansion of that into the proxies that are largely affiliated or associated with Iran. So you have right now Israeli actions against Hezbollah, which have, to a large extent, decimated Hezbollah's capability, at least currently, on what it can and cannot do vis-a-vis Israel. And then also you have the Houthis that are a proxy of Iran, but also have their own independent logic and independent mechanism by which they operate that have, as everyone is widely aware of, made transit through the Red Sea and the commerce of the Red Sea far, far more complicated. Added to that, you have a constant kind of network of transnational criminality that does everything from smuggling arms to smuggling drugs to even smuggling legal goods, but trying to get around taxes. And then you have in it a host of different operational coordinated efforts, some led by the United States, some led by the European Union, some led by the regional states themselves, that are all trying to do everything possible to keep the waterways around and near the wider Middle East open and safe, and essentially to protect freedom of navigation. That report card is not finished. The problem with a lot of kind of the analysis of what's going on is everyone takes a particular point in time and states that this is the inevitable future projected out 10 years. Things can rapidly change, as the last year has taught us. So while things have gotten incredibly coarse and there is widespread conflict, there is also a lot of energy on responding to said conflict and responding to said complications that have it currently also integrated into a new kind of gear shift that are trying to ramp up responses. But to move on further down to kind of U.S. aims independent of these conflicts vis-a-vis the Middle East, you have the efforts by the United States on capacity building, which for a U.S. mindset usually is oriented towards the provision of stuff. So this is hardware, this is munitions, these are boats and vessels, these are technological tools for everything from radar stations to computers. But increasingly, the U.S. is moving towards what we could call capability enhancement, essentially working with our partners in the region. What do you have on the books? How can we help you make that better? And so a lot of this is focused on intensified training, intensified interoperability, the expansion of use of data and the sharing of data, and also from the U.S. mindset, the deepening of professional military education and professional military ties. The U.S. does have a long track record of very effective professional military education, as does India, as does a lot of our European allies, as does Japan. But the U.S. is really emphasizing this a lot when it comes to what you could call the Western Indian Ocean. Tied to that, we have a lot of 1.5 efforts that the U.S. is either directly or indirectly attached to that are tied to networking, essentially the architecture of the Indian Ocean and specifically the Western Indian Ocean. So some of these are led by the U.S., Combined Maritime Forces, which operates more as a kind of a naval unit of volunteer stature that has different task forces that have different missions and different areas of responsibility. But it's also including U.S. engagement on the Western Indian Ocean's domestic and inherent infrastructure and architecture it's built. The Indian Ocean Commission, the RCOC, the RMIFC, efforts that are being led by some of the Arab partners in the Arabian Peninsula. You have European efforts such as Crimerio 2 that are led by the EU, and then a host of other things, the IFC IOR, even the IFC in Singapore. All of these things have indirect or direct relationships to what is happening right now in the Western Indian Ocean. And then moving onward, the U.S. is investing a lot in data and technology. And I know this audience, some of you are going to be roll your eyes at me a little bit about the benefits of technology. But for the United States, at least, especially when it comes to maritime security and maritime domain awareness, the idea of technology is a game changer on catching up the differential between lower economic countries of lesser development and those of higher development. That can be a way to really bridge capability gaps. How that is being done is still in progress, but it's something the U.S. is investing substantially in. And then also support for regionally driven standards and norms. Obviously, the U.S. is going to stand by the principles of a free and open Indo-Pacific, freedom of navigation, a rules-based order. But a lot of these, as Dr. Bueger kind of pointed out in his remarks earlier, they're being challenged, or what I would do as an amendment is they are in flux. The kind of agreements of the past don't necessarily linger today, but that doesn't mean that the fundamental underpinning of multilateralism is no longer warranted. It just means the rules have to be reinvigorated and possibly rewritten, but commonly amongst all of us in here, not by one country, whether it be the US or say the People's Republic of China. This includes things such as undersea mining, tools for the blue economy, standards for technology, AI, cyber, all of these other things that are related to maritime security, either directly or indirectly. These are all aspects that the US is investing in. This gets to my points here in a minute. This is just the normal map, just overlaying various layers on an ArcGIS map. This doesn't even get to, there's no AIS pinnings on this, there is no VMS, there is no RF, there is no of the advanced satellite tools that we have heard so much about. This is just base layering you can get free. You add in some algorithms to this, and as someone who's not a computer coder by background, you can start doing some really, really interesting stuff. But this gets to things that the US is engaging on and how we're trying to wrap our head around this. One, you have to recognize that the US itself is trying to figure out what this transformation when it comes to technology means. So a lot of it is our own investment domestically. So there is a revolution going on in the United States when it comes to a buzzword that people have probably heard a lot about, public-private partnerships. Essentially, we need to get smarter. We need to get more streamlined on how we respond to a whole host of security challenges. We need to have an understanding of what is data in terms of intel and what is data in relation to information and what that distinction is and how we therefore can define it and then move out on sharing or not sharing. And the private sector honestly has created markets in things that were traditionally just reserved for states. And as a result of commercial forces getting in there, they do have some downsides, but they can move faster often than states can. So the US is investing substantially in public-private partnerships, working on shaping those market forces as it relates to taking interest in what's going on our oceans, above our oceans, and beneath our oceans, and gaining a greater sense of what our stakeholder community is when it comes to the maritime community. It's not just the Navy or the Coast Guard. It's not just Washington and the combatant commands. It also includes other interagency elements. It includes private sector actors. It includes shippers. It includes fishermen. It's a much bigger community. That's a good thing, but it means that you have to rally more forces. Moving on. I think I disagree with some of our previous speakers in saying that the US does support multilateralism, but it's doing so through the minilateral thematic element, just because of the impediments of some of these multilateral engagements. The UN does have impediments, especially when it comes to Security Council. We've seen that played out in a variety of fashions. So things like the Quad, things like AUKUS, things like trilaterals, they're not meant to replace the multilateral engagements. They're meant to answer specific challenge sets that therefore can reinforce those. That's the US mindset, at least, and how those things are being approached. And a lot of them are still in progress. You hear this a lot about the Quad. I'm more of a Quad, a positive viewpoint. Maybe it's the American in me that I'm more positive about what the Quad is accomplishing, but I also understand that for a lot of the world, they're saying, what is the Quad doing? What is it delivering? What are the practicalities that it's talking about? Well, a lot of it is really focused right now on what the Quad states are they themselves aligning towards. And that, when you take India, the United States, Japan, and Australia, aligning those four countries in their own mechanisms, processes, and procedures is in itself very, very complicated. But that moves to the next point, and that is deepening partnerships and demonstrating utility. And a perfect example of this is obviously the US-India bilateral relationship. You've seen massive progress over the last 25 years, but especially during the Biden administration, things have kicked into overdrive. Between the Biden administration and obviously the Modi administration. Indus X, from a defense standpoint, has become a hallmark accomplishment where this public-private mindset of merging private sector interests with state-driven guidelines is creating a cooperative ecosystem to incubate new ideas for security, new pathways for making progress in the maritime domain, as well as other domains. But it has become something that the United States, at least, and Washington talks about with a great deal of pride, and shows the depth by which India and the United States have deepened their engagement. From there, defining the information space, helping to share data, advance efforts to deter unlawful and exploitative actions. Data provides sunlight. We heard it yesterday from our colleague from the Philippines, talking about we would not know the depth of some of the tensions going on in the South China Sea if countries like the Philippines or Vietnam did not reveal what is actually happening, that boats are being rammed, that water cannons are being turned on inside their own exclusive economic zones. We would not know what is happening in the Arabian Sea when it comes to dhows that are illicitly trafficking arms and things like that if it wasn't for a whole network of NGOs that were highlighting this. Data provides sunlight, and the U.S. is trying to not only grapple with that realization, but integrate it into how it approaches this engagement. And then the final point is help connect efforts for information sharing, law enforcement, countering disinformation, and burden sharing. The information space is another element of maritime security that we don't often talk about in our professional gatherings, just because if you're operator, you're not supposed to be a communication specialist. But often these competitions, these challenge sets are discussed before you even can really get to the operational side. This is something that China has used to great effect in changing the narratives on the street, so to speak, when it comes to the Indo-Pacific. This is something Iran has used very effectively throughout the Western Indian Ocean and the Arabian Peninsula to kind of sway public opinion vis-a-vis what's happening with the Red Sea and the Houthis. And countering that is very, very complicated. And then a final thing I would add on, again, echoing Dr. Bueger, is the U.S. is investing a lot in connecting the maritime domain to what is happening in orbit. A lot of the incubators in the tech side, they're getting heavily involved in low Earth orbit satellite flotillas that go up that provide more data in real time than ever before. And these are things that are commercially licensed. Yes, the U.S. may have a license for them, but it also can mean that India could get a license, or if you're a big enough company, you can buy your own license to get this data. There is a revolution in orbit. That is a good thing, but it also comes with some downsides. As Dr. Bueger pointed out, we have to wrap our heads around how this fits into our understanding of maritime security, the Indo-Pacific, and a kind of broader sense of multilateral cooperation. Just looking quickly to the horizon, what we should expect in the future. Further adaptations to the U.S. Indo-Pacific concept. There was an announcement a few weeks ago that India and the United States, along last, are going to have a bilateral discussion about what the Indian Ocean region means respectively to each of them. That is scheduled for next year. So the Indo-Pacific as a concept is not a static understanding inside the United States. It is evolving based upon the own interactions of the U.S. government interagency. How the U.S. prioritizes efforts and coordinates with its partners. Essentially, how existing methodologies that have worked will remain and how new ones will be added to it. You'll see this particularly with technology, as I've highlighted. The maturation of thematic efforts and resulting bureaucratic reforms. Returning to the Quad, part of the mechanism of the Quad is getting the 4 Quad states familiar with the Quad itself. There is no secretariat of the Quad. This is something that is, again, voluntarily done by the 4 Quad states, but there is progress being made, and that progress will start increasingly coming out into the public domain to understanding how all of these things work, especially when it comes to the maritime domain. A lot of it is tied to technology, a lot of it is tied to information, and how we progress maritime domain awareness. And then finally, building communities of experts, operationalizing information, and building networks across regional divides. This is something the U.S., and I know everyone in here wears an Indian naval uniform, knows this. The U.S. has 3 COCOMs that cover the Indian Ocean. We're working on that. We are working on that, of crossing those seams. So some of this is internal to the U.S. process, where our own boundaries have impeded us from having better conversations about the Indian Ocean, how what happens in the Arabian Peninsula matters to the Bay of Bengal, how what happens in the Bay of Bengal matters to the Gulf of Guinea. These are things that the U.S. is working on internally, but also communities of experts. 1.5 efforts, such as this conversation, this dialogue, but a whole host of other things that a lot of you in this room lead. The U.S. is increasingly seeing the viability of them as a generator of ideas, of ways to pinpoint and make more precise policy efforts that are being done, and then using those essentially communities to actually inform real policy making inside of Washington. These are becoming increasingly common when it comes to Washington. So I guess comprehensively you could say that the revolution from the maritime space, at least over the last 20 years or so for the United States, you're seeing an evolution of what maritime security means. You're seeing an evolution of what maritime domain awareness means for the United States. And you're also seeing an expansion of a communal and a global defined maritime security community, not led, not defined by the U.S., where the U.S. is an important member, an important investor and stakeholder, but no different than any other actor. So with that, I look forward to your questions. I thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Over to you, Professor Patalano.
Okay, excellent. Excellencies, flags, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, panelists, I'd like to thank the organizers, the very good friends of the National Maritime Foundations, for having me back here in Delhi. It's a terrific pleasure to be here and share some thoughts with you. I'm a military historian by trade, so forgive me, but one of the things, and I spend a lot of time teaching in class, so I have to say I want to commend the National Maritime Foundation for the incredible number of young people that I can see in the room. That's a wonderful thing, because we're talking about today, we're talking about the present, but you sitting there, you are the ones that are going to make the solutions and the ideas that we talk about today the reality of tomorrow. Without you, all of this is going to be extremely diminished in its value. So thank you for doing that. I want to start with an obscure story, and if you bear with me, by the end of it, its meaning and its significance will make sense to you as well. On a rather sunny and hot February day in 1804, a small ketch of dubious build was about to enter the harbor in Tripoli. As the ketch get closer to the harbor, it was very visible a very significant substantive warship in the harbor. That warship was the USS Philadelphia, which had been captured by Barbary pirates just a few months earlier. That ketch that was so unassuming was hiding, in reality, a small group of sailors from the US Navy who, during the night, boarded the ship and blew it to pieces. Their strategic objective was for that ship not to fall into Barbary hands. Now, the key element of that story, though, is that the one person that enabled that operation to be successfully conducted was a person unknown to history. A local Sicilian pilot by the name of Salvatore Catalano, that nobody ever heard before or since, was the person that had managed to sail the ship across the Mediterranean throughout a very difficult storm, getting closer to Tripoli, speak to the locals, and then engage by avoiding reefs and shores to get as close as possible to the Philadelphia. He knew the place like it was his own home. In the contested global order of the early 1800s, a period during which control over the means to project power was one of the key manifestations on how you exercise your contribution, your shaping, your role, your position in that global order, a very remarkable thing happened on that occasion. A local was essential to deliver a global impact. Patalano's experience as a sea captain, his ability to speak the language, to have traveled across the Mediterranean, that central part of the Mediterranean, his ability and its knowledge of tides, currents, links across different seafaring communities, and made all the difference. In that contested global order of the day, the empowerment of the individual stakeholders, no matter how small they are, contributed to make the difference on that day. On that day, he was history in that global space, contested as it was. And there is an important lesson to take away from there, which I think is very applicable to the type of contested global order that we're talking about, and in particular, the type of solutions. My theme for today is about cooperation between India and the UK in terms of advancing what is this resource geopolitics contested global order at sea. That resource geopolitics element is very interesting because it introduces us a particular element of how we should understand today the global order at sea. Global order at sea, on one hand, still is about having the means and controlling the means to project power across the oceans. But it is also, as Christian was talking about earlier, about the ability to have the means to control the space itself. The ocean is no longer a place where you go from point A to point B with occasional seafaring activities around it. When it comes to the ability to project state control power, the sea itself is becoming the object of that contestation. Fish, data, resources of different kinds, connectivity itself, these can all be weaponized. And I think the video that we watched this morning elegantly put that notion together. But as a result of that, what we also understand is that governance, and in particular our understanding of governance as a result of the establishment of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and how it creates across the states the world over, not just coastal states, but anyone that uses the sea, an awareness about the rights and duties that states and communities the world over have in order to responsibly and sustainably use the ocean. So as we proceed in our conversation today, we have to acknowledge that the global order at sea today is the convergence of a history in which that structural level of international relations, use of power that states project at sea to expand their control through these means over others has widened out and now involves and includes also that contestation over the control of the space and the resources and the elements in it themselves. Governance, therefore, it's a difficult task because in the old global order at sea, what you could certainly do, you could establish hierarchies of naval power, and the naval treaties of the 1930s made that very clear. And the sort of struggles across the world among them, occasionally supported by enlisted local allies, was about it. Today, however, I think that we are about to see a significant change, a change in which the local has an incredible capacity for agency in that governance piece. How the global order at sea changes does not depend on major powers alone, because those rights and duties to responsibly and sustainably access and develop and use the resources of the oceans and the ocean itself rests among the communities that face particular portions of the oceans. The Salvatore Catalanos of today that operates in their governance space, the locals that have the knowledge, that have the experience, that have the expertise and professional know-how of a particular portion of the ocean, have an increasingly greater importance. In fact, I would say they are more important than ever. That local that goes back to the global and shapes it has never had the meaning and the potential that it has today. Now, why does this matter? Because if we agree that the global order is likely to remain contested because the structural element and the governance piece sit next to each other, and it's impossible to talk about one without acknowledging the other, I do think that's where the space for cooperation emerges. When we're talking about the UK and India in particular, I think it is fair to say that the fundamental shared understanding of the importance of maritime security in this maritime century, a century in which our dependency on the ocean for our survival, from an economic point of view, from a human being's point of view, has never been as important as it is, for the very good reasons that the Christians mentioned earlier on. It's been one of the fundamental reasons why, within a panoply of initiatives between the UK and India, maritime security has been certainly one of those in the driving seat. If we think about the Indo-Pacific Ocean initiatives that have been promoted by Prime Minister Modi, the UK volunteered to co-lead together with India the maritime security pillar of it. And I think within this context, part of that shared understanding of the importance of maritime security to the global order at sea rests upon the fact that both India and the UK do share that fundamental meaning that empowering the stakeholders that are responsible for the management of the oceans at the local level is how you build that consensually agreed rule-based order. I really like this idea of consensually agreed because that really captures very much. This isn't about a global order that comes down on top of those who then have to implement it. This is about awakening awareness, empowering people with their own voice, providing them the grammar and the vocabulary so that they can articulate that voice. That's what maritime security cooperation has to do. And that's my last point for my remarks today. I want to focus on one particular option, one potential form of cooperation. From my perspective, and for the reasons that both my preceding speakers have outlined earlier, there is a considerable number of different initiatives in this part of the world, whether we want to limit it just to the Indian Ocean or we want to sort of expand it to the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. And that's a really good thing. I think it's a great thing. What we need next, therefore, I don't think it's any more sort of initiatives, global of sorts or regional. What we need is a way to harness the incredible energy and vibrancy that comes from all these initiatives and translate into, if you want, a box that creates the opportunity for that grammar to become a lively thing, for that voice to be articulated. The sum of the total is not just the different parts of it, it's what we make of those parts. And we translate into a transferable experience that enables others to take it a step further. And so what I want to talk about for the last couple of minutes of my talk is the idea of a center of excellence for maritime security in the Indian Ocean region to begin with. You saw it coming. Because I think that's a really important type of initiative. We have different initiatives that allow maritime domain awareness, standards in terms of conduct at sea. We also know all the basic rules, but how do we translate the experience of those who operate on a daily basis, and then we pass it on to others so that they can develop the means to discuss together what maritime security means. Let's make it possible to have that maritime security recipe book from which within that context we'll let the regional recipe, the menu of the day that everybody signs up to by sheer matter of practice. In that sense, therefore, a center of excellence from my perspective or a vision for an initiative of that kind should be a center that does both training and education, as well as research. The research and harness the data from the experience of daily basis and then translate into a possession that can be shared with everybody in the region. so that everybody can sort of like take their own analysis and reflection of what is happening and then come together and talk about it. And propel initiatives like this one at an even faster pace, because everybody will have a common knowledge base. It also, I think, needs to be inclusive. This is about, or my task was to talk about UK-India cooperation. But this is not a UK-India only or alone type of initiative. It is about the UK and India, two important international stakeholders in the global maritime order, having a shared understanding of how crucial it is to empower everybody else with the capacity to make their contribution and do it together. So an inclusive space for me, in that sense, from an intellectual perspective, in terms of what you teach in this kind of center of excellence, as well as how you standardize the practice of what you're teaching, it's absolutely essential. Because unless it is felt as a common ownership, it'll never fly. And the third thing that, from my perspective, it needs to try to do is to bring together the growing and ever-expanding number of stakeholders in the maritime ecosystem, if you want. It has to talk to navies, coast guards. It has to talk actually to different parts and departments of governments from across different governments. It needs to bring together regional institutions, whether it is fusion centers or indeed other initiatives or representatives of organizations like Maritime. It needs to bring together industry and elements of the private sector who are going to be increasingly more important. It has to have lawyers, tech gurus. It needs to become a place where all the stakeholders that have a perception of the importance of the maritime domain to our societies can come together and share their experience on one hand and help shaping the rule books, if you want, of how we practice the conduct of maritime security in the areas that we already know. But as Christian mentioned earlier, there are others that now are emerging, and we don't necessarily know how they're going to interact with maritime security. Space, we might have to intervene in it in order to make it more sort of synergically connected to maritime security, or maybe not. We just do not have at the moment all the answers. But we need to have a lighthouse that is going to beam out, right, that sense of direction of travel, where the safe shores of maritime security are. That, to me, is the only way in which, in the global order of today, a global order in which that structural contestation that led in 1804 to the blowing up of USS Philadelphia links to a global order of today in which that dimension still exists, but at the same time has to coexist hand in hand with a much greater responsibility of ensuring the governance that will allow us to continue to sustainably develop, enjoy, and make the most of that link between human beings and the ocean. In that space, the first step in a place as important as the Indian Ocean and as diverse as the Indian Ocean is a center of excellence in which bringing that wealth of information together and enable research that access to data from practice, as well as the development of doctrines, manuals, the sort of things that will make and translate a general grammar into the practical ways in which it is implemented, not just a local affair, but a local resource of expertise, experience, and knowledge that becomes the fabric that connects the broader region. And if that is successful, and if that is an inclusive environment, then the next step, you'll have others who want to join. And there's no reason why there shouldn't be, as it is in Europe for completely different reasons, a network of centers of excellence that from Western Indian Ocean to the South Pacific define the broader intellectual lighthouses that are bringing maritime security to life, closing the gap between the local and the global, and enabling, like Salvatore Catalano did back in 1804, the local to become the history that defines the global. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. You, Doctor.
Good morning, everybody. Let me first join my co-panelists in thanking the organizers of this conference to reaching out to me again, giving me an opportunity to come back here and participate in these really inspiring discussions. And with this, how do I get this started? I just push this. Okay. I decided for this purpose to focus on one specific dimension of resources. So we might subscribe this with, and now for something completely different in the Monty Python tradition. I have some preliminary remark about that, and then I will delve into the details. So I decided to focus on strategical or critical raw materials, because this is a debate that has come up in Germany over the last 5 years. I would say it has intensified, and you will see how this is reflected in the documents and institutions we have in Germany. So it's not only about the critical raw materials as such, but also the mining, the smelting, and the refining. And I think it might be, there might be something for every representative here in the room to compare the situation of Germany with their own national situation. So I will not talk about energy, and the maritime will be sort of the general background for what I'm going to say. These strategic or critical raw materials are important not only for green transformation and mobility transformation, I think that was already mentioned yesterday, and digitalization, but also for the arms industry. And I think that's an important dimension to bring up. So as a background for the change in German thinking, after the end of the Cold War, we entered an era of hyperglobalization, and this brought about the integration, but also fragmentation, if you will, of supply chains. So we offshored basically everything, including these critical raw materials. In Europe, there is no mining going on anymore. We basically stopped because this was considered a dirty business, and so we outsourced it to other countries. You might think of that what you want. With the global financial crisis, it's probably the first doubts come up about how good this kind of hyperglobalization is, and a rethinking starts about the interdependencies we have created in the world. After 2012, I see basically 4 factors which have shaped the German thinking and the European thinking about these issues. The first was the development, the domestic development and the foreign policy development in China after Xi Jinping took over the chairmanship of the Communist Party in China, and also US policies under Donald Trump. So trade relations were weaponized, and we started to think this is probably not only a positive thing. The second is the US-China strategic competition, which forced us to look back at geopolitics. And I think that Europeans, with a few exceptions maybe, but Germany is certainly among the countries who had forgotten that geopolitics exist after the end of the Cold War. We had become very cozy in this post-Cold War European order that we believed is very stable. Then came the global pandemic, and it really hurtfully showed us, painfully showed us, what vulnerabilities we have by being over-dependent on certain countries. I mean, it's one thing to produce a mask, it's another thing to produce a respirator, and we were completely dependent on imports of these very fundamental goods in health. And then the biggest shock came when Russia invaded Ukraine. You all know about this, especially for Germany. It had a massive impact on our energy supply, so we had to reorient ourselves within a very brief period of time. And all of these factors also influenced our thinking on critical raw materials. So the national position in Germany is we had to have a turn in our thinking, a geopolitical turn, which we were not used to anymore after the Cold War. And we looked more critically at our economic relations and dependencies in general, and for critical and strategic raw materials in particular. So contrary to what we believed in the past, that economic interdependency is a stabilizing factor in international politics, we looked at it in a way that economic interdependencies themselves can be destabilizing in international relations. Now, you can never look at German national politics without looking at the European Union framework, because this is where we move in, and especially on economic issues, the authority of the European Union is quite substantial, so national solutions are not viable. The goals, if I see it from my perspective, if you look at Germany and the EU as a whole, is to create resilience at home and diversification abroad. So the resilience at home part you see in the toolbox that the European Union has developed over the last years. There is a Public Procurement Act, a Trade Enhancement Act, investment screening, anti-coercion instrument. All of these instruments in the toolbox are targeted at China in a way, but of course we don't say that this is about China, but China was the reason why the EU saw itself forced to develop this toolbox. And abroad, we try to diversify our relationships, politically, diplomatically, militarily. And this is good for the region because the Indo-Pacific strategy of Germany and also of the European Union is a result of this desire to diversify our relations. And we finally take the region as a region seriously and not stare at China exclusively anymore. So the Indo-Pacific is seen as the most dynamic region in the world. You have heard all of this yesterday from the EU representative here in India. I will not bore you with the documents and the institutions we have created. So there is a whole plethora of German documents, and all of them deal in one way or another with critical raw materials or strategic raw materials. And also the EU and others, other documents are relevant in this respect. Admiral Chauhan yesterday mentioned the strange triad we have in our relationship with China. I'm happy to talk about this later in the discussion. But there are also European documents and initiatives that address the critical raw materials more specifically. And then finally, there is the NATO strategic concept of 2022, which also addresses this issue in a small part. So I thought I will bring some graphics that show how dire our situation is. If you look at the list under China, this is where we are dependent on imports. The European Union is dependent on imports from China. You see the percentage numbers on the right. Everything that is in italics is about mining. The rest is about processed and refined critical raw materials. There are some other countries who play a big role, but if you look at the dominance of China in this picture, you already see why the major concern about critical raw materials lies in the Indo-Pacific for the European Union, because this implies transport has to be safe, maritime transport, etc., etc. And I quickly go through some more. The red is China. So you see rare earth elements, magnesium. The dominance of China is basically overwhelming for the European imports. It's only lithium where we have some other suppliers, and it doesn't look so bleak. Here you see rare earth magnet market. Again, the red is China's dominance, and you see how dependent we are. And I can only encourage every country to go through this exercise to come to a realistic risk assessment. I think Japan has done it many years ago, more than 10 years ago, because it was hit first by Chinese ban on exporting rare earth to Japan. And we should probably have listened to Japan at that time. These are the dependencies of our key industry sectors of imports from China. So you see it's not only the green transformation, but also things like drones, where there is a dependency, and therefore we cannot ignore this. Now I bring this in because it shows the weaknesses that we have in Europe in this whole supply chain of critical raw materials and strategic raw materials. So you have the extraction and the dressing, and then the smelting and refining, which basically doesn't exist anymore in Europe, which, if you look at the whole cycle, also means we are not good in recycling, because you need the same facilities to recycle these materials, to refine them, process them, and recycle them. You need the same facilities, which we do not have anymore. So we talked already about these minerals and metals yesterday, but I just wanted to show that the dominance of China does not come from the extraction phase in this cycle. It comes from the refining and the industrial manufacturing. Here are the example of aluminium, lead, nickel, tin, and zinc. You see that it's not the extraction phase where China has the dominance. And you see this in this graph as well. The difference between 2002 and 2018, it's not in the ore extraction, it's in the smelting, refining, and the demand. Okay, so a few general remarks about Germany and the EU in the Indo-Pacific. You heard a lot about that already by the EU representative here in India. I think that with the German Indo-Pacific guidelines and the European strategy on the Indo-Pacific, we really have increased our diplomatic and economic engagement and also our military engagement in the region. We have started to build stronger partnership in the region. There are 2+2 talks now with Japan and with Australia. We have a regular military deployment. 2 warships from Germany are here in the region at the moment. I was in Manila 2 weeks ago and was invited to one of the warships. So this is quite striking from my perspective, because Germany is not the most outgoing when it comes to military deployment. The EU representative yesterday mentioned the many negotiations on FTAs with the region. I'm personally not optimistic that this will work, so maybe it's time to look at lower hanging fruit like sectoral agreements, because not only is it difficult to negotiate these FTAs, it's also difficult, more and more difficult to ratify, get them ratified in the European Union. Here is a graph that shows what you can do, so focus on the middle part, what you can do to reduce dependencies on critical raw materials. So you're bundling demand, recycling, domestic production, technical innovations, probably to find different solutions that are able to replace these critical raw materials, because yesterday we talked about that they are finite too. It's not that there is a limitless supply around. Mandatory reserves is something we are looking into, and then of course diversification of supplier countries. And this will increase supply security. So our major, one of the arrow moved without me knowing. There are some German European concerns with the dependency, especially on China. I already said, basically, we have no mining companies anymore in Europe, with a few exceptions that do extraction. There are no refining and recycling capacities, and there is this high dependence on China. And this entails the dependence on maritime transport routes through the Indo-Pacific. So we're concerned about Chinese export restrictions, bans, export quota. This has happened in the past. Price volatility, supply chain disruptions, supply risks, critical raw material exports as an instrument of coercion, as has happened in the case of Japan. The competition with China, but also other big players in third countries. And I think that we have to applaud the Chinese for having a very clever strategy over the last 20 years to really build up their dominant position in this area. And it will be very hard to disentangle from this dependency. So Germany's approach has to be national, European, and international. If we try to address this over-reliance, there are several measures, and they're all in this European Critical Raw Materials Act that was passed 2 years ago, I believe. So one is made in the EU rare earth. So reshoring the extraction process, the processing, refining, and the recycling to the European Union. There will be a lot of public resistance. We have to deal with this somehow. Germany, France, and Italy are coordinating in these efforts because we realize that one country alone cannot do the task. So you see, we even in the European Union, we have some minilateral formats that are existing. Then partnering with the broadest possible range of countries. This includes countries like in this region, like Indonesia, that have some raw materials. We have to address the regulatory frameworks at the national level. There are many bureaucratic obstacles to be removed at the EU level and also international. And we have to look at sustainability standards and transparency in the supply chains. So there are several European initiatives in that regard. I close with the challenges we are facing, and they're pretty grim, I have to say. One of the biggest challenge I see is the relationship between the state and companies in the European Union, and especially in Germany, because the government and the companies are driven by completely different logics. So if the government talks about de-risking, the companies take up the word de-risking, but their understanding is not that they should disinvest from China or diversify. They pursue a China plus one strategy. They invest even more in China because they simply don't have the same kind of logic. They are driven by their shareholders, by legal constraints, reputational constraints, but not by the security concerns that the government has when it talks about de-risking. Then we have this contradiction, and I think this is true for all of us, between industrial policies, active intervention of the state, And the free markets we're all always talking about, free market, open market, free trade, blah, but in reality, we all take measures to protect our own economies in a better way. And in a way, China forces us to become more like China instead of us changing China. So that's an important contradiction we have to keep in mind, how to find the balance there. Then how to break China's dominance in these areas of smelting and refining. And they're also investing in third countries, in Latin America, in Africa, but also in the Indo-Pacific countries in mining. So do we come too late into the game? The time frame for us is also grim, because if you want to build up these facilities from scratch, it will take at least 15 years. So the dependency cannot be lowered very easily. I think Japan is a model in a way for how to approach this, but you had 12 years now, and I think you reduced it to something like around 60% dependency on China. So you see how hard this process really is to, once the entanglement has been created, to roll this back, so to speak. Then funding is a very big issue because if you need to give incentives to the company to even go down this road, otherwise they will keep buying rare and strategic minerals and stuff in the country where it is cheapest. We already, and I don't have this on this slide, mentioned yesterday, we also have to address the fact that resource-rich countries want to move up in the value-added chain, like Indonesia, for example. So how do we reconcile this with our home shoring? Can we accommodate these interests in countries of the global south that have resources and don't want to just be exploited for their minerals? We have to avoid intra-EU competition. We have to face the fact that the US is mainly pursuing its own national interests, so we are in competition in a way, and we have to see to it that sustainability standards are kept. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Warden. Last speakers joining us virtually. Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Unmute
Yes.
yourself.
Do you hear me also? Okay, the floor is mine. So, so good morning to all and greetings.
You're not audible. You have to unmute.
Oh, sorry.
Ma'am, if you would please allow us a second, the audiovisual team is on it and they're trying to fix the audio issue.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I'm sorry. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, yeah. So good morning to all and sorry for that. Well, first of all, I would like to warmly thank the organizer, to thank the National Maritime Foundation and its very well-known director, Vice Admiral Chauhan, for inviting me to this conference, which has really become a benchmark for exchange on the Indo-Pacific. I couldn't make it to India, but I can at least take part to the exchange virtually. So my presentation deals with French geopolitics in the seabed and the quest for new seabed resources. And I will, in my presentation, focus on the Indo-Pacific. And I will develop 4 major points. First, the French vision of the Indo-Pacific, insisting on the maritime dimension of this approach. Of course, I will come back on the main element of the French strategy concerning seabed resources. I will comment on now the very well-known French president proposal to observe a ban on deep sea mining. And finally, I will say a few words on France's seabed warfare strategy. Sorry, I'm trying my screen. I have some difficulty to, I'd like to go through. Yeah, okay. First of all, the Indo-Pacific. As you may know, France was one of the first European nations to adopt the Indo-Pacific concept. And this was quite an obvious strategic move for France, as it possesses territories there and therefore sovereignty interest to defend. This strategy also insists strongly on the fact that France is a resident nation because of its overseas territories in the Indian Ocean and in the Pacific. In the Indo-Pacific, France is represented by a great number of islands, La Réunion, Mayotte, New Caledonia, French Polynesian Islands. These islands are very vulnerable and are very isolated, but they represent 3/4 of France's exclusive economic zone. And the French territories of the Indo-Pacific are therefore very important strategic asset for France, justifying its presence in the region and enabling it to deploy military means. And they also enable France to claim its status as a world maritime power. So the Indo-Pacific concept and its adoption through 2 strategies, as you can see on the slide, one drawn up by the Ministry of Armed Forces and the other by the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, have enabled the French presence and its diplomatic action to gain some visibility in the area. So France's involvement in the Indo-Pacific is a part of a very broader approach to maintain influence and to secure strategic interest in the region. It reflects a blend of geopolitical ambition, economic interest, but also, and this is a very important pillar of this strategy, significant environmental consideration. Let us go quickly through the key points of this Indo-Pacific strategy. The strategic importance. Well, the Indo-Pacific region is really crucial due to its significant maritime room and rich resources, and France aims to ensure the security of these routes, support freedom of navigation and access to resources. There is also a quest for geopolitical influence in the French positioning. By maintaining a strong presence in the Indo-Pacific, France aims to balance the influence of other major powers and shape the geopolitics of the region with like-minded partners. Another characteristic of the French Indo-Pacific strategy is its strong military defense dimension. France maintains a permanent military presence in the Indo-Pacific with military personnel, several naval and air assets, which helps in safeguarding its interest and supporting regional stability. Environment concern is one of the main pillars of this French Indo-Pacific strategy. The region is a focus for environmental protection effort, given its rich biodiversity and its impact on climate change. And this can also be a role for France's military assets employed in IPDR operation. And the last element is international cooperation. France strongly emphasizes multilateralism and cooperation with regional partners to address common challenges and promote a rule-based international order. Going now on my second slide, I just want to mention France's maritime dimension in developing this Indo-Pacific strategy. Indo-Pacific offered to France the occasion to showcase its maritime status. France as the world's second largest maritime area after the United States. That is to say that this larger maritime domain covers more than 10 million square kilometers, thanks to the EEZ of France's position, as you can see on the slide, in the Indian Ocean and in French Polynesia. And this maritime dimension of the Indo-Pacific has revived France's traditional engagement in blue diplomacy, largely focusing on ocean governance, and in particular that have been largely underlined yesterday. France was heavily and is still heavily involved in the drafting and the adoption and the ratification process of the PBNG treaty. And its policy on seabed resources is largely inspired by concern to preserve biodiversity, but also to combat the effect of climate change, thus championing the Indo-Pacific island country neighboring the French island in the Indian Ocean and South Pacific. Moving on France's perspective and giving some element of context of France's strategy related to seabed resources. Of course, the seabed in the Indo-Pacific, this has been already underlined, is very rich in resources, such as rare earth elements, which are very crucial for modern technology. And of course, France is interested in exploring and potentially exploiting these resources to reduce dependency on other countries. And its approach is characterized by a concern not to harm the environment, particularly in the South Pacific, where the vast majority of island states consider the protection of the ocean and biodiversity to be crucial for their spiritual, economic, and social well-being, and for their daily life of their population. As I already mentioned, France also strongly emphasized sustainable development and environmental protection in its approach to seabed resource exploration. This, of course, include adhering to international regulation and promoting responsible practices. So, as you can see on the slide, you have some key element of this strategy. Of course, the strategic importance of the seabed, it's a critical area for France's national security and economic interest. And this includes the protection of underwater, not only natural resources, but underwater communication cables, not only exploration of mineral resources. There is an emphasis on technological innovation. France is investing in advanced technology, autonomous underwater vehicles, remotely operated vehicles to enhance its capability in deep sea exploration. You can see on the slide ULITs, the yellow robots. It's ephemeral underwater robots that can descend to depths of 6,000 meters, and it's one of the pride of the French oceanographic fleet. to precise, IFREMER is a French research institute to explore for exploring the sea. I already mentioned environmental consideration. So France is committed to sustainable exploration practice, and this involves studying deeply the environmental impact of seabed mining and ensuring that activities do not harm marine ecosystem. France is insisting on international cooperation. France collaborates with international partner, not only but to share knowledge, to share scientific resources, and of course is working with ISC, particularly in global initiative, develop best practice for seabed exploration, and is putting a very strong emphasis on research and development for better understanding seabed physical and biological characteristics. And all of these elements are part of a global investment plan, France 2030. And I'd like now just to insist on the fact that France is collaborating with other countries on seabed resource exploration and management through very various regional and international initiatives. Of course, I already mentioned ISA. France is an active member of the ISA, which regulates seabed mining and activities in international water. As a member of EU, France participates in collaborative project and research initiative focused on marine and seabed resources. France has a lot of bilateral agreement with various countries for scientific research and technological development related to seabed exploration. In the Indo-Pacific region, France collaborates with countries like India, like Australia, like Japan, on maritime security and environmental protection. And of course, France is relying on research institution. I already mentioned IFREMER, and collaborate with international counterparts on exploration project. Let us go now to the major point of my presentation. As you have already known about, France has taken quite a strong stance against deep sea mining, particularly in international water. I mentioned, of course, President Macron's intervention during the COPs 2027, but also during the UN Ocean Conference a few months before. And the president called for a complete ban on deep sea mining, emphasizing very clearly the need to protect marine ecosystem, which wasn't really a surprising initiative because it's aligned France with its broader environmental policies and its well-known commitment to marine conservation. And the fact is that despite holding exploration licenses from ISA, France has not actively pursued deep sea mining activities in the Indo-Pacific region. Instead, the country focused on promoting sustainable practice and supporting international effort to regulate and to potentially halt deep sea mining. And this position of France is driven by several key concerns, as you can see on the slide. Environmental impact. Deep sea mining poses significant risk to maritime ecosystem. It can lead to habitat destruction, loss of biodiversity, disruption of ecological process that have taken millions of euros to develop. There is also a climate regulation. The deep sea play a crucial role in regulating the Earth's climate by storing carbon. The notion also mainly referred to uncertainty, scientific uncertainty there is still much that scientific do not know about deep sea mining. And of course, there is a strong emphasis on precautionary principle. France advocates for this principle, which suggests that in absence of full scientific certainty, actions that could harm the environment should be avoided. Both Germany and Spain joined France in opposing deep sea mining. They support also a precautionary pause on such activities until more scientific data is available and the environmental impact are better understood. Costa Rica, Chile, Panama have also called for a precautionary pause on deep sea mining, mentioning similar concern about the lack of scientific data, the need for robust environment regulation. France is, of course, in favor of better regulation for deep sea exploration, but is fully aware, as many other countries, that implementing seabed mining regulation presents several significant challenges and is a very long process. To illustrate my my propos, I would like to turn to French Polynesia as a kind of a case study which illustrated France's seabed policy, because in the Indo-Pacific, French Polynesia, with its very vast EEZ, hold a very significant potential for seabed resources. And I collect some interesting points about the region, seabed resources and related activities. The seabed of French Polynesia is very rich in polymetallic nodules, cobalt-rich crust, polymetallic sulfate, which are very valuable. And the French government and scientific institution have concluded a lot of exploration campaigns to assess the mineral potential of the region. And this effort include mapping the seabed and studying the geopolitical and environmental characteristics of the mineral deposit. There are a lot of environmental consideration in this approach, given the ecological sensitivity of the deep sea environment. Research is focused on understanding the potential environment impact of seabed mining and developing technology to minimize this impact in French approach. French Polynesia is working on developing a regulatory framework, to manage seabed resource exploration and potential exploitation. And this includes setting up administrative and legal structure to ensure that any mining activities are conducted responsibly and transparently. And this effort, of course, reflects a balanced approach on which France is insisting to exploring and potentially exploiting seabed resources while prioritizing environmental protection and sustainable development, and taking into account cultural consideration. And this cultural significance of the marine environment to the local population must really be included in every approach concerning exploitation of seabed resources. Of course, any economic activities should respect and should integrate local cultural values and practice. And so we can see that while seabed mining presents quite significant economic opportunity for French Polynesia, it also requires very careful management to balance potential economic benefit with environmental
1 minute to wind up.
And social consideration. And for now, the government of French Polynesia does not want to go further. And it could be noted that Parliamentary Assembly of French Polynesia voted in December 22 for a moratorium on seabed mining, wishing to wait for the result of environmental impact studies. And French Polynesia parliamentary also called for a public consultation mechanism to ensure that the consent of local population is respected. And again, this is quite very important. Just to finish, I would like to mention that the French Ministry of Armed Forces has recently, in 2022, adopted a seabed warfare strategy in order, as you can imagine, protect its national interest, and in order, of course, to facilitate, to ensure freedom of action of its armed forces. It considers that the seabed is becoming a very disputed area, and of course, this strategy wants to protect the major activity of the state against some pressure coming from potential competitor. And there is a strong aspect in this strategy to prepare capabilities and to give notably the French Navy some specific means in order to implement the strategy and to consolidate its expertise in seabed warfare. And with this point, I will finish. But I want to remind you the UNOC conference on the ocean that France is going to end with Costa Rica in Nice in June next year, with the ambition of bringing or helping announcing the ratification of the BBNG. And I think that many topics that we're talking about today regarding seabed mining and discussion ongoing on this subject within ISA will be also at the center of the discussion. So I will stop there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Madam Perron. At the outset, I'd like to thank our panelists for sticking to the time, and we have about half an hour for Q&A, and I'll open the house for questions. We will take 2-3 questions together. Yeah, and gentleman in the center. Please identify yourself and who the question is for.
Thank you, sir. My name is Anurag Khan. I'm a PhD scholar from Central University of Gujarat. My question is to Professor Tokuchi. So recently, the Prime Minister of Japan had identified the Quad as a part of an Asian NATO aimed against China, and India was quick to cancel that, saying that we are not in any alliance between partnerships. So my question is that can India and Japan have a partnership or alliance? Most of the forums like Quad or any India-Japanese partnerships have the US imprint or the shadow of the US. So can India and Japan have any security partnership without any overt US involvement?
Yes.
I'm Captain K.K. Sharma, Naval veteran, and thank you to all the panelists for the insightful talk. I would like to address Professor Hideshi, knowing of his experience with the underwater surveillance systems. Considering Japan's strength in advanced robotics and AI expertise, can we look at joint development of autonomous underwater surveillance system? Probably collaborate on developing AI-powered underwater drones for the maritime surveillance. With your personal experience on the autonomous underwater surveillance system at the Tokai University, this would help definitely in strengthening the Indo-Japan maritime cooperation and accelerating this particular proposal. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Professor, you can answer these two.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to answer the first question first. You know, the new Prime Minister of Japan wrote an article and contributed it to the Hudson Institute of the Hudson Institute. And they actually, you know, the you shouldn't be led by the title of the article. And actually, the title itself is, you know, establishing the Asian NATO. But if you read Mr. Ishiba's article very, very carefully, he's not necessarily planning to establish the so-called Asian version of NATO, at least in the foreseeable future. You know, in my personal perspective, he seems to be pointing out the necessity to create a security environment in which a multilateral security arrangement is possible. Then how can we do that? You know, according to my take, reading his article, the answer is by transforming and also strengthening the current security partnerships and arrangement, partnerships and alliances. You know, as far as Japan itself is concerned, strengthening the Japan-US alliance relationship. You know, there are many things to do in terms of Japan-US alliance relationship. It is not a one-sided protection of Japan by the United States, but it is true that the Japan-US alliance is a asymmetrical alliance. Japan doesn't have any obligation to defend the United States, even if the United States is invaded. So it is asymmetrical, but the asymmetrical alliance is very, very difficult to manage. So that's will cause dissatisfaction on the both sides. And actually, you know, Mr. Trump criticized the Japan-US alliance in 2016 in his presidential campaign. Even after he became president, he continued to criticize the fundamental structure of the Japan-US alliance. So therefore, in my take, Mr. Ishiba's proposal is to make the Japan-US alliance more symmetrical, and also by doing so, strengthening the alliance relationship with the United States, and at the same time, strengthening other partnerships with Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, and Thailand, and other ASEAN members and ASEAN itself. And also, of course, we shouldn't forget the importance of their partnership with South Korea as well. And of course, the Quad and the India, these partnerships are very, very important. Why? Because it is good to have as many friends as possible. So that will, upgrade the value of Japan in the international community. I think that's what the new Prime Minister of Japan is saying. And as far as the Quad is concerned, we are fully aware that the Quad is an important partnership for security, but it is not an alliance. I do not think that India will be, partnering with any other countries in the alliance framework. We know that India is a very autonomous country. We respect that. So, but even if India is not an ally of any other countries, but it is quite possible and realistic to think about strengthening the partnership with India, particularly in maritime security, and also in order to counter China's expansion. And in response to the second question, I think it's a very interesting idea. So I think it might be an agenda for the working group between the two countries on the technological and weapons cooperation in future.
A very good morning to you. I'm Captain Sarfraz Khan. I'm undergoing the Naval High Command course at Naval War College in Goa. My question is addressed to Mr. Jeffery Payne. Sir, in the recent past, we have seen an increase in the clout of China in various geopolitical issues in West Asia. My question is, how does US see this increasing influence of China in West Asian affairs, especially because in the last many decades, it was always the United States which was the dominant player in the region. I will also seek your remarks to this question, specifically in the kind of self-reliance which USA has achieved in terms of its energy needs in the recent past, and therefore the corresponding reduction in the importance it perceives in the West Asian region. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, give the mic behind. Excuse me.
Thank you to the panel. It was a great presentation. And hello, Marion. Sean Andrews, Australian National University. Since Marion opened the box, and if I was to capture yesterday, it was really about the maintenance of access and the rule of law at sea. If anything this morning is about cooperation at sea. So I want to bring in something from left field, since Marion did open that box. When it comes to cooperation, the seas are arguably the globe's greatest source of infrastructure. It's the global operating system. But no one's actually talking about something we can cooperate on, and that is refuse collection. There is massive swathes of refuse rubbish at sea in the Pacific, and also degradation at sea in the West, in the Indian Ocean. So I'm just wondering, noting the treaty signing or potential ratification of the BBJ next year, and plastic ban treaties, and the reality of what you can do in the domestic sea that leads to the high sea, does the panel have thoughts on this is something that would benefit all humankind? And is it something we should lean forward and bring to a track one diplomacy schedule, because it's actually meaningful, helpful to everybody in cooperation rather than competition? Thank you.
Side, yes. The lady there.
Hello, good morning to the esteemed panel and everyone here. I'm a master's student of international relations from JNU. My question is a very general one from the entire panel, since it holds everyone as a stakeholder within its ambit. So the question is, given the increasing militarization of the Indo-Pacific, particularly in the contested areas like the South China Sea, do you believe the region is on an irreversible trajectory towards the conflict? Can the military buildup in this resource-rich region be genuinely framed as a defensive one, or are we witnessing a form of strategic resource competition disguised as security measures? Thank you.
Jeffrey, go ahead.
Okay. I will answer the last question first, just to get my panelists to dive deeper on that. I don't think conflict is inevitable. I think if you want to just look at the US-China relationship, like I said in the presentation, technology is where a lot of that competitive relationship kind of emerges. But also from the US mindset, and my colleague from APCSS, who you'll hear from tomorrow, he's positioned in Hawaii, has a little bit of different vision than I do. But for me, timing is the greatest advantage for the United States. The longer the kind of horizon moves outward, the more the kind of friendships, partnerships, advances that those who stand for the current order kind of build up the bastions, the harder it'll be for a conflict scenario to become inevitable. So it's really kind of the next few years are very, very critical. But as for the captain, your question, which was a great one, obviously the United States is not as reliant on West Asia's energy as it used to be. However, we are absolutely committed to the stability of price to the greatest extent possible, because it determines half of the commodities in the United States, just like it does here in India. So that supply chain has to remain open and constant. So the Bab el-Mandeb, the Strait of Hormuz, the oil, natural gas has to flow. And otherwise, that's just suicidal for the entire global economy. As for China and the MENA region, that's an incredibly complicated and we could have further conversations about it offline. But what I would say from a kind of 30,000-foot level, first off, every country in West Asia, just like every country in the globe, has every right to engage with any other partner economically they want to. There is a narrative in Washington where letting China in the door at all is inevitably like somehow you're letting the monster in the house. I don't subscribe to that mindset. They are a sovereign state that is offering an economic opportunity. If you decide that that is in your best interest, so be it. There's a lot of Middle Eastern actors who are also using a hedge strategy, and they use the economic might. However, on the flip side of that coin, China has no realistic capability of providing a security umbrella that matches to the United States, even if they signaled they wanted to. They have sent no signals that they want to do that. But even if they did, one of the unfortunate side effects of the current conflict is the ballistic missile strike that occurred earlier this week and the one that occurred in April. The joint operation to intercede those drones and missile strikes was massively impressive as a military operation, especially if you're sitting in the Arabian Peninsula, you're the UAE, you're Saudi Arabia, and you're looking at what being a part of the United States security umbrella means. China is not really playing in that game. So we're talking about two sides of a coin, but it's much more complicated than that. I hope that starts to address your question, sir. Go.
I also hope that conflict is not unavoidable, but it doesn't look very good, I have to say. If I look at the trends in the region, from a European perspective, I have to stress that we are very concerned in Europe about the ever closer relationship between China and Russia. I mean, China delivers a lot of things to Russia needed for the military-industrial complex, probably not arms, straightforward, but underneath that threshold, machine parts and stuff like that is delivered by China. And I think it will be a very bad example if Russia succeeds in Ukraine and manages to win this war from its own perspective in any way. I think this will set a bad example and will probably encourage China, because they are looking at this war very closely. Probably in the beginning they believed Putin, and in 1 week everything will be over. And they were surprised by the resistance of the Ukrainian people against this invasion. And so from our perspective, and I think this is probably an important message to deliver here, because India is trying to do something. Modi has visited Russia and Ukraine, but is still kind of in a neutral position. But from our perspective, it's really, really important that Russia does not succeed with this endeavor. And therefore, I can only hope that we manage to do that by helping Ukraine. And in this region, I think that the European role is limited, but what we can try to do is signaling to China that it will come at a price if there is some sort of conflict over Taiwan. And I hope that our politicians are playing through the scenarios, the possible scenarios, and are prepared for that, because otherwise you will see that the European Union will respond like a headless chicken if they're not prepared and they don't have in the drawer the possible list of reactions we might bring out. So that's my appeal to our politicians, that they really look at these scenarios very seriously. But we need to do everything to deter China from going down the same road as Russia did.
A couple of quick points. So, Sean, you're absolutely right. That should be an easy one to play. The enormous amount of plastic in the ocean should sort of shake us into action. But I think the question then becomes, so how? How do you actually dispose? Who's going to be tasked with that? Where do you dispose of it? And in trying to answer to that question, I think we're going back to the point I was trying to make it earlier. That is, you need a place like a center of excellence for maritime security, where you start making absolutely normal for all those who are in the room about to ratify the treaty banning plastic, thinking about, right, so what do we do next? And then when they go home and they compare their notes with counterparts in other departments of government, they will have a similar reaction. Yes, absolutely, we need to do it. Unless we create a space that becomes that intellectual sort of driving engine that creates an awareness and translate awareness into responsibility to act and responsibility to act into the grammar to make it happen, we will not have the answer to what is, in principle, the obvious question from a most obvious thing that one should be doing about. So thank you for raising that, because in a way, it allows me to go back to what I was saying, and like any good academic, remake my point again. Precisely to answer your question, we need to go and have places like a center of excellence that instill that kind of a urgency to act and the ability to know how to get about it. On the question about international relations, there's perhaps two things to say here that we haven't mentioned. Number one, I think conflict and cooperation, they exist in the same space, and one needs to be sort of rolling back a little bit from the sort of 1990s, early 2000 end of history type of approach to international affairs, in which we try to convince ourselves that we were going to remove conflict from the realm of international affairs. I think that was an unusual moment. And this is more what history suggests is the regular sort of state of things. Now, what is very different, however, when it comes to the maritime order in terms of the maritime pillar of international relations is that compared to any other time in previous history, whereby the use of the sea was predominantly as an active projection of power of states across the sways of the oceans. Today, we have that sense of governance piece that comes from the duties and responsibilities to protect the ocean, right? That in itself is very important because it injects potentially a layer of resiliency, right? That resilience that previously we could not have. Previously, if you wanted to avoid war, you needed to get people together in a room. Now, people are getting together in a room like we're doing today regularly because of all these subjects. So you have a potential element of resilience in the regional architecture in particular, whereby you can have this conversation. The second point I was going to make is specific to the character of war at sea as opposed to war on land. War at sea is much more complicated to happen by accident. And when it does, there's always, because of the complexities of concentrating power at sea, a question of political choice to escalate it to the next step. You have a number of instances in this part of the world that did not materialize in genuine conflict. Think about the sinking of Cheonan, the South Korean corvette in 2009, by far the largest loss of life out of ordnance exploding and sinking a surface combatant. You did not have a war resulting from that because attributing what had happened and the dynamics of it creates layers of complexity which don't automatically translate in the type of situation that you've seen, for example, in places like Ukraine, in just in the weeks before and in the months sort of going up to the re-initiating of aggressive hostilities of Russia in Ukrainian territory. So in that sense, two things that you want to bear in mind. In fact, three. One, conflict in terms of as part of international relations dynamics, it's always been more the rule than the exception. The exception was the last 25 years, I would say. Number two, in contemporary terms, the maritime world is very different from what it was before sort of UNCLOS, and the general movement that from the late 50s onwards created this idea of and injects resilience into regional architectures. Three, if the context in which today conflict is more likely to happen or centered around maritime theaters than ever before in the past, then past experience is only to an extent helpful, because war at sea has very different dynamics, and concentration of forces and escalations are an act of political will that is much more complicated than in land theaters. So all of this, to me, is the beginning of a positive sense of a conversation.
Yeah, Professor.
I also would like to make a comment related to the question posed by the lady. We have been witnessing conflicts in the South China Sea. Even though there is it is debatable whether the current conflicts are above the threshold or under the threshold of the armed attack in the sense of the Article 51 of the UN Charter or not. But already it's a conflict, as we already discussed yesterday. And although I'm not complacent about the situation in the East China Sea, but the situation in the East China Sea is relatively under control compared with the situation in the South China Sea. Why? It is because there is robust U.S. presence in the Northeast Asia, 55,000 U.S. troops in Japan, including U.S. carrier battle group, and 30,000 U.S. troops in Korea, mainly Army. And there are two robust coast guards, Japan and Korea. In contrast, most of the Southeast Asian countries are weak. Philippines, I'm very sorry to say that in front of our Philippine friend, but the Philippine Navy's Coast Guard, they are weak. So there is a gap, power vacuum in the South China Sea. So China is always trying to fill the gap and advancing to the South China Sea. In the 1950s, after the French withdrawal from Indochina, and in the 1970s, after the U.S. being defeated in the Vietnam War, and in the 1980s, after the Soviet partial withdrawal from Vietnam, and in the 1990s, when the United States withdrew from the Philippines, always China capitalized on the power vacuum created in that region. So therefore, it is very, very important to fill the gap and retrieve the balance of power in our advantage. For that purpose, two things are necessary. First of all, like-minded countries, Japan, US, Australia, New Zealand, Korea, and India, those countries should fill the vacuum by deploying their forces in exercises, protocols. And in the long run, it is much more important to help weaker Southeast Asian countries acquire their own capabilities. So that's very, very important, I think.
One last question. Yep. Light blue.
Joint panelists, I'm Group Captain Kranti, Indian Air Force, undergoing a Naval Higher Command course. My question is to Mr. Jeffery. So during your talk, you mentioned about the importance of technology to shape up the MDA maritime security. When it comes to the technology, the agency which strikes in the mind is the DARPA, sir. So my question is how DARPA and in what way has played a critical role in shaping up the objectives or achieving the objectives which were flashed, and with special emphasis in Near East and South Asia, the success rate and way ahead, sir.
DARPA is obviously very famous. It has a particular reputation, but honestly, DARPA's in-house. It's state instituted, it's state-led, it's state-explored. It does great work. A lot of it is behind the veil. I don't know necessarily what its rate of success or anything like that. They do amazing work. However, the logic of that is one of the luxuries the United States has is the amount of technological innovation that exists within our borders. And so the logic is tap into that to serve state purposes. And so you see this now with the Defense Innovation Unit. You see it with incubators. And so the way it's played out in the defense, in the Department of Defense, is all the COCOMs, the combatant commands, have various avenues by which they can put experiments into place, whether they're instituted by DARPA or they come from the private sector and implement a different way. The one that's most famous for the maritime space, but there's multiple ones for different domains in the central command, is Task Force 59, which essentially used off-the-shelf, commercial off-the-shelf technology, but deployed it in various capacities through sensors, through through automated boats, through drones in the air, coastal radar, all fused and integrated. Now, does it fix all the solutions? No, but we were able to show our regional partners for not a substantial amount of cost and independent of any U.S. supply chain, you could directly access these from multiple vendors. You could link these things together and it provides you greater warning of, say, a drone swarm or potential ballistic missiles or what is happening in your exclusive economic zone in a more precise way. Where you don't necessarily have to only rely on state-to-state mechanisms, you can add to it. So like the way a former commander always talked about it is the state-led maritime domain awareness or domain awareness efforts are the core of your meal, but what you have as sides can now be provided by the private sector. So why aren't you buying sides if you have a hunger for them and you have the capability of buying them?
Thank you. Madam Perron, do you have any comments to make?
If I may, just on the global situation in not only in ASEAN but in Europe, and the fact that I will echo what Gudrun said about the fact that yes, EU and a lot of EU member states are considering that the situation is very complex, it's very dangerous, and are very concerned about the porosity between what is happening in the Indo-Pacific, not only the South China Sea, but maybe in the Taiwan Strait, and what is happening in EU. There is a kind of strategic connectivity, and precisely when you see some, I will say, actor like Russia or North Korea, and China supporting the war in Ukraine, and there is a kind of also of tendency to see and ask a kind of answer on the two sides. When you consider that, for example, South Korea is considering to support Ukraine by, you see, bringing some military equipment. This is a kind of way to answer to the active participation of North Korea, bringing support to Ukraine, bringing support to Russia, excuse me. So there is a tendency to see this strategic connectivity between the two theaters and kind of, as I say, porosity. And this is really something very, very dangerous to observe. But when I consider the action that EU can have regarding the South China Sea, which was the question of the lady, I think it can be interesting for to contribute to complicate the strategic calculus of China. We are not, for many of us, contrary to France, having some military asset permanently in the region, but by signaling, by showing our flag regularly, by issuing communiqué, as we regularly did, observing the situation of Philippines against China. I think that we can have at least an influence, and we can show that we are we can show on which side we are, and this can bring some reason for China and other revisionist power to think twice between bringing the level of attention to another step.
Thank you. We've run out of time. At the outset, I'd like to thank the panelists. We've had an interesting Q&A, and some important points have been made in this session. One, and I think one of the most important point is the maritime domain has taken center stage. There is a great deal of discussion between countries in the Indo-Pacific. The IPRD is one such venue. It's now running in its 6th year. And maritime domain has taken center stage. A suggestion was made by Professor Center of Excellence. There are, like, as part of ION, the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, there's a vertical on HADR, and the Indian Navy and India has been the center of excellence. We have drawn up SOPs and run workshops and all that. And the region is much better prepared to handle HADR now post the 2004 tsunami. Let me give you a very example which all of you can identify with on resource vulnerability in the maritime domain. In 2009, there was, in the approaches to Bombay Harbor, there was a collision between a container ship entering Bombay and a bulk carrier leaving harbor. It led to the sinking of the container ship just off the Prongs Light, and in the process, he listed and dropped over 300 containers into the sea, which floated all over the harbor. And Mumbai Harbor came to a grinding halt. It was shut down. There was no traffic in and out because of the danger of another ship hitting a container and sinking. The state of Maharashtra has diesel is shipped into Mumbai Harbor from Mangalore, and the reserve is of 4 days. You need a diesel carrying tanker into Mumbai Harbor every 4 days. Otherwise, you run out of. This task was given to the Navy, where we surveyed the harbor. And for 29 days, merchant ships were convoyed in and out of the harbor by minesweepers till all the containers were accounted for. It's a very small incident, but you can see the vulnerability of resources. Now, when you expand it to the larger Indo-Pacific region, you all need to work together to protect the sea lanes, not only the sea lanes and shipping traffic, but also resources, living, non-living. And we need to cooperate and work together to have a global solution on the high seas and in the Indo-Pacific. And on behalf of all the panelists and myself, we'd like to thank the National Maritime Foundation for giving us this opportunity to interact with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please join me in thanking all the participants of this session. May I now request Dr. Christian Bueger to come up on stage once more to present tokens of our appreciation and gratitude to all participants of this session. May I request all the participants to step forward and come in front of the tables. The ceremony. Dr. Hideshi Tokuchi. Mr. Jeffery Payne. Admiral Sunil Lanba. Professor Alessio Patalano. Dr. Gudrun Walker. So I may request everyone to please come forward for a group photograph as well. Ma'am, we are... Thank you, sir. May I now request everyone on stage to please resume their seats in the audience. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, you will agree that it has been a fascinating and absorbing forenoon. And yet, even the most delectable intellectual fare somehow fails to satisfy one's stomach. However, before we break for lunch, we will take a few moments longer of your time to display a navigational video which will help you reach the venue with relative ease.